Hey everybody, welcome to Adobe Live. Just a couple of issues with Google just there at this second, but we are here. It's always like a little heart attack. Like YouTube just decides it doesn't want to work for a second. I'm like, all right, cool. Thanks everybody for hanging out with us. We're here for an hour today, and I'm joined by Adrianne Walujo. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Hey, thanks, Lynn. Thanks for having me. I was, I had a heart attack with you as well just now.
Like, what's going
It's,
on? Yeah,
it's my internet dead.
it's been a bit funny this week. It's amazing how much you find you rely on. I mean, everything I have is in Google Sheets and Docs and YouTube and everything. So incredible how much we rely on some technologies and things. You can just hear the truck driver picking up the bins. Of course, perfect timing as always. Hey Dee. Hey Festus. Richard is here. Hello Richard, great to see you. Blue Tiger Gaming, what is up? Yeah, it's really great. Johanna's looking after us. Festus, we got R&B. We're going to have a great time today. I'm going to stop talking because we're only here for an hour and we're talking motion and animation and After Effects. And of course, that can take a lot of time. But this is part two of our two-part series. This is the last one today. We spent last week in Adobe Illustrator setting everything up, which we'll check out what we did in a moment. And now we're going to bring everything into After Effects and do some simple animations that everybody can do. We're going to try and break it down into some simple steps so that you don't have to make animation as complicated as this, but this is something you can try. You can try at home with your own Illustrator files. So without further ado, should we jump over and have a look? Quick little recap of what you showed us last week.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So last week we had so much fun creating this scene over here of a character just in a train coming back from groceries. So we have that kind of backstory behind that. And yeah, as Flynn has said, we're today gonna be how does this Illustrator file going to be exported to After Effects and ready for animation? And I guess this is something that I do a lot because I work with a motion designer, and this is what happens if anyone is curious, is that in the industry that usually like there's an illustrator or a designer that specializes in creating these assets and then preparing them so that they can be animated by an animator. Of course, there are a lot of amazing people out there who can do both, and it's much easier because you know what happens from each of the step. But like when you are illustrator and a client asks you to prepare it for animation, it's going to be really different compared when you're illustrating just for printing or just for like web banners and things like that, because there are a few things that we'll need to consider so that it's easy for the next person to animate. So yeah, so today like we have these scenes, we have the color palette from last week, and if you guys haven't tried it, the video is in Behance and YouTube, I think, so you can follow along and create your own illustration, create your own scenes. And today we'll be going through on my process. Again, there's no one right way, but I'll share what I've known. And just a bit of a warning, it's been a while since I do a lot of animation projects since if some of you guys don't know, like I've worked full time as a UI UX designer, so it's been a while.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that last week. How you juggle like all these hats, all these different hats that you wear. And I think last week the real hit was the how to draw inside, the draw inside mode. So check that out. Super cool tip. I got messages after the stream from a couple of people saying, "Oh wow, I didn't know that," and I've been using Illustrator for a long time. So you never know what you're going to learn. Even unplanned things like that pop up during these streams. It's always great.
Yeah, I get a lot of messages from people that's like one of their biggest takeaway that changed their life. So I'm really glad that because it changed my life too. So I'm really glad that it also can benefit other people. So yeah, like usually what happens is like when we create like a style frame or like, so style frame is basically like what a final scene will look like in the motion. So when you give that to client, this is like, so they have an idea of what a final rendered illustration looks like. So we put everything in one scene and it's fine. But like when you want to move them to animation, what you usually do is like you separate the character and even like you don't even need this like the color palette, but you'll separate like the characters and the background for easier purpose. Because the thing with After Effects is you need to separate each element that will be animated in different layer. And I'm gonna show you what I mean. So for instance, let's see this character here. So what happens is usually I'll copy that, I'll create a new file, just name this, say, character. Very straightforward. So for this instance, like I'm not gonna be animating a lot, but I'll just go through the process. What is normal is like you really separate things, their head, and then even their left eye, and you have to be really actually better like this. You have to be really, this is quite tedious, but this is really important because you don't want, when you go to After Effects and everything is called layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, and that's such a pain, especially if you work in agency, an animation agency, and then you pass on your work, and then when they're ready to animate it, everything is just called layer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that's, I think, I don't think anyone wants that. So like it's really important when you do this is, as an illustrator, even if you don't animate, is kind of understand the process, so that when you are preparing the layers, you kind of have an idea of what will be helpful for the next person. And I think that's similar to a lot of things, like when they say should designer code or not. I think you don't have to code, but having an idea of how things work help in when we're empathizing, when we're passing on work, especially in a group work like that. So this is ear, left, and it's a lot of layers. So we have to really go through each and every one of them.
That's great. So it's good to it's really good to think about what you're going to animate. So if you want to, you might want the head to slightly move a little bit. I think we're going to talk a little bit about parallax. So you're probably thinking about which two or three or even 4 layers are going to be moving at different speeds and everything. So you would be planning that as you're doing the initial illustration. You'd be thinking about those sorts of things.
Yep. It usually happens as well as like with the storyboarding, so you know what the next scene is gonna be. So your illustration is planned for that, because like even in this is not a good example, but sometimes we draw things and then we just merge few different shapes together and it looks okay in this position. But imagine if you are moving a limb, like you'll need actually to prepare files that are not seen but actually will be needed when they move around. So for instance, instead of like, you can just draw a limb like this, I guess. Like this is like your upper arm and then your lower arm. But in reality, we know that usually what happens is they move here. So you'll have to separate these two. This is like the upper arm, and then you have to mark this as 2 different layers. You can't see that, but it's like this. So when you move them, oops, I forgot how to change. But basically, like when you put the anchor point, like when it moves, like it still works as like a normal hand.
Yeah.
So like these are the kind of things that you have to pay attention. It's like when you're animating something, how do things in real life work? And I guess that's why animation can be hard, because you have to pay attention to the physics of things and what looks real and not, and it's a lot of understanding the basic. But the basic of animation, if it's 2D, 3D, stop motion, motion graphics, they're all the same, because like maybe like the way you execute it's different, but like the idea behind how things work, how things move, how things bounce, it's quite the same. And in this instance, I'll show like later, like when the character's head is just moving right and left, like the hair is kind of having that delay to have that bounce. So I'll show that. So that's why I'm separating even like things like the rib, the bow here. Yeah.
Cool. A couple more shout outs. We have Yori Napati in the chat. That's lovely. Previous guest of Adobe Live. Lovely to see you here.
It's amazing. Hi, Yori.
Gracia's here. Alex
Yeah.
Mills is in the house. Lovely to see you too. So nice to have you all hanging out with us. And also, if you do have any questions, we're not going to take a Q&A break today. We're just going to keep flowing along. So just throw your questions in the chat while we're going along.
Yeah, basically like in this case, I'm not going to break everything down because I'm just gonna be animating the top part. But what usually happens is like when you have a full body, you'll have the torso, you have the neck, you have the upper arms, lower arms, the wrist, and then the hip, and then there's the upper legs, lower legs. So everything will be separated in all these different layers. And I know it's so tedious, but when you actually look at all the layers, everything named perfectly, you'll be so happy, and an animator will thank you so much about that. And you'll thank yourself if you're doing the animation, because you don't have to go back and forth about that. And yeah, so that's the character. And if you go back to our file from last week, we have this, and I know like we did like a draw inside, but in animation you have to really break everything down. So applying the similar principle that I shared just now with the character is just making everything look really raw as possible. So like if you can see here, like I actually separated like all the different things, like the sparkle, the seats, the posters, the rail, like the handrail. Like I even separate the top and the bottom, because again, when it swings, I want to have that kind of different speed so that it looks like there's a weight at the bottom. There's hill 1, hill 2, hill 3, the sea, the sun, the cloud, and sky. So yeah, just if you're unsure of something, just separate them into its own layer, because it's much easier not to do anything with it, rather than realizing halfway when you're animating that actually I want this to be animated, I want this to move, because kind of inspiration comes. So when in doubt, just separate them into different layers, even though you may not even use it, because it's really hard when you export this to After Effects and then you realize that you actually need this in a different layer, because it's gonna mess everything up and you have to adjust a lot of things. So it's just easier, like when you're in Illustrator, it's just to separate everything into all these different layers, because you never know when you will need it. And yeah, so that's what I usually do. And then if we go to After Effects, so I have the file ready, because I'll need more time. If you want to see me importing all the files one by one, I think we'll run out of time by the end of just
that'll take up the full hour popping everything in.
Yeah, it will. Yeah. So here in After Effects, you'll have yours. I know it can be overwhelming when you first come to After Effects and there's so many different tools, but I think like in a lot of other softwares, like you'll be just using a few of them, like you will not be using all of them.
So not to be too intimidated by all the things you can do, because there's only a few things we're going to focus on.
Yeah, and like you'll start to interact with the other tools as you go on. Like you'll find what is the settings, but to do like a basic animation, like you don't have to know lots of them. But the main thing that you'll need to know is obviously this screen, like where you get to preview your animation. And a really cool trick that I learned last time from my mentor is that when we preview something, is usually in... Okay, so this is what we're gonna make today. I'm not sure you guys can see the animation, but it's really subtle. It's not 100% done, but like most of them are there. So I'm gonna be showing how there's the different speed in going through the hill behind, and just her head, just enjoying the groove.
Yeah, she's grooving.
And just really chilling and having fun. And yeah, like one of the really cool trick is like if you don't have like a powerful like hardware, like you can view your resolution just half, so it will be more pixelated. But if you just need to see like the basic movement and you can't wait like 5 minutes for it to load, like this is a really good trick. So you can view it in full resolution, half, third, and quarter. And this helps a lot, especially when you have really big file and you need to see if the movement is correct, but it's like really, really slow. So it's really good to know this, so you don't waste time waiting for the preview to render. And I'll be using full because it's not that. Yeah, and in here is where all your library is, where you're gonna be importing your Illustrator file, your sound, your footages. So this is basically your library. And a good practices as well, actually, even like labeling things, like this is the layers and this is the composition, and I'm gonna get through what composition is. But what happens is like when you import a file and then you just go to, like you just click one of them, for instance, and then you choose character training. And then composition, footage, dimension, layer size, or document, like you can choose that.
And you're just importing, it's just an AI file. So the same AI file that you've saved, it's literally just the exact same file, nothing special, no exporting, nothing like that.
Yeah, this is what's really cool. Like everything is just integrated. And another really cool thing about it is that, and I think I've shown that before in my video last time with the Adobe, is that say that you have this character and you want to change her hair color. You decided that I want her hair to be pink for whatever reason.
Why not? Pink's cool.
Yeah, why not? Like, and then you save that. It should be translating like straight away in After Effects, which I find really, really useful, because sometimes like you're not sure about the color and but you don't have time to perfect everything at that stage. But then like you can keep adjusting as you go, and like see that I don't re-export everything, I don't re-import anything new, but it's just saving this file again. But with that in mind, realize that whatever changes that you do in this file will affect the After Effects. So it can go both ways. Like what happened to me last time was like I was just making some changes, and it kind of like matches up with all the animation project, especially if you change dimension, because they get confused. But this is a good way of changing things like colors or certain things when you have exported them in After Effects. Yeah.
That's cool. I'm just going to address a question in the chat as you're going along. Mohammed's asking, could you please explain how to import the file into After Effects, because it's not clear. So you simply just save your Illustrator file, and then you can just import it straight in that way.
Yeah. So we go to File, Import File, or just Command I or Control I. And Windows is you do this, and then you choose. This is like the AI file that I was showing just now with the character, and you double click that, and then there is like import kind. It's like usually composition, and then layer size. So what happens is, I'll delete this. Like this is all the layers that you have been preparing. Perhaps I'll save this first, because this is the one that, because for this purpose, like I don't need that many layers. But if you look at here, like this is the one that we did together today with the eye left, eye right, nose, mouth. And when you import that here, and you double click this character, and then you'll see that everything is now here. Everything is separated as it is in Illustrator. And now it's ready for you to animate and use in your project. Cool. Is that clear though?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. The next thing that we can do is as well, like so this is the character file that I'm actually using. It's not a lot of layers because I don't need too many of them today. So it's just the mouth, the head, the left bow, right bow, the bun of the hair, and then the body. So nothing as elaborate, but I'm just saying that in a normal projects, you separate the eyes, the ears, the legs, and the arms if you want them to move a lot. So yeah, I'm just gonna show how do we prepare a character in After Effects. So when you go to, I'll delete this. So this is the one that I used for today, but I'm gonna set it up again. So there's this thing called parenting. So what that means is like, say for when my head move, I'll just try to rotate it. Like you can see like the mouth, the body, the hair is not moving along with it. It's a bit scary to look at if you think about it. And so this is like this is when I say that things about physics come back, like observation is, you know, like when our head move, the point where it starts to rotate is not from the center.
Right.
It starts from our neck. So this thing called anchor point, we need to change that. And we press Y, and then you drag that to the bottom. So what that happens is like it changed the way it rotates. This is more natural because our human body doesn't rotate from the center. Like our human head doesn't rotate from the center.
Right.
But then the thing is, this is so annoying. Do I have to then animate my hair, my body separately? Like, thankfully not. So what we do is we know that the mouth is always going to move together with the head, like in real life. So we click this tornado looking thing, and then it's called parent and link, and then you just drag it to the head. So what will happen is that the mouth will rotate together with the head.
Cool. And so that's parenting. So yeah, like a parent and a child. Like it's you're telling it this always moves with this layer.
Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, like that's a really it's called parent and child. So the child is the mouth. The child will follow the parents, and then the left bow and the right bow and the bun will also follow the head, because that's what happens with your hair. It follows your head. Yeah. So and then like what usually happens is like then the head will be parented to the neck will be parented to the torso. So just it's a lot of planning and a lot of like thinking when you're rigging all these characters. So this is called rigging, and just which one is being parented to which, and that's will rely on our understanding of the human body, and like things like the anchor point, we change the way it rotates and the way it moves. Yeah. So I have now the hair and the hair accessories, the mouth parented to the head. So what happens is when I rotate it, it's actually following that, even though it's actually a separate component on its own. So it can still be animated, it can still move around, but then we'll always follow the head. And this is a really useful trick, not just for human body, but even I'll show later, is like you can create this like remote control using null object to help you move things around the scene without having to click on the thing itself. But yeah, we'll get to that later. But it's a really useful.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a really, really useful tool and feature to know, because if not, we'll be animating everything. And
that's great. And I think that's a really great explanation of it as well. Hey, we had a question. Yuri was asking, do you use reference when you're animating? If you do, where do you get them? I sometimes act out the scenes myself and get a reference from there.
Yeah, I think that's what happens a lot of animation. You either make yourself into the reference, or you ask someone who is in the same room with you to do certain movements. And that's really important, because with animation, like it has to look natural. So even like you have to observe like for different things. For human bodies, like that's what I do literally. Like you just try to move your hands or ask someone to do movement for you. And that's why you see in a lot of animation studios, that's what happens. Like the animators act out the animation themselves. And for different references, like the reflection of a glass on a window, things like sparkling water, and like how to move, that's when you have to go to stock videos or YouTube and just see how these things actually move,
right? And
just learn. And that's why like observation is key for artists and especially animators. And yeah, so yeah, like this is like a branch of animation which is like vector animation, and there's this another one that's called hand-drawn animation, where you literally draw everything by hand, frame by frame, and it requires even more observation, because you have to know how does this move, there's more freedom to that, but then you have to really know what you're drawing, so it makes sense. If not, it's gonna look really rigid. And I think one of the mistakes of animating without reference is that everything looks quite it looks quite rigid in that sense. So
Yeah.
it's good to have the references. So thanks, Yori.
Cool.
Like I think that's what most people do. No worry, like acting become a dummy, and then like you have a mirror, and then that's what happens. Like Illustrator, you draw, and then you make all these different expressions
Right.
because you follow what you draw. It's really quite funny. Yeah, so that's like you parent that, and yeah, okay, and then so this is so that's for the head, and then when I say about so when you press Command K. Oh, this is another important thing. Like also is a frame rate. So when you start a project, it's also good to ask and confirm with someone when you're starting an animation, what is the frame rate of this project going to be for? Because for different studios or different medium, you'll require different frame rate. But the standard is 25 for a lot of animation.
So I guess that comes down
So
to like what you're doing with the file. So if you knew you were going to YouTube, you could look up YouTube and find out what's the frame rate for YouTube, and then try to do that. If you knew you were going to make a GIF out of it or something else, you probably want to work that out. Yeah, you could research a little bit.
yeah. So frame rate is basically like, if you can see, it's like frames per second. So the more frames you have in 1 second, obviously it's gonna make it more fluid, but that means it's gonna be more things that you'll have to do in those 1 second. And like, it's not as if like a high frame rate is always preferable, because depending on the kind of effect that you want to have, because if you want to have like a stop motion kind of aesthetic, like you might actually want to lower the frame rate to have that kind of really clunky look, which is actually quite enduring as well. So depending on what you want to use it for, you can adjust that. And yeah, and then the background color, you can use this, you can change it around. I'll use white, but remember, this is not like, if you export this out, it's gonna be transparent or black, because this is just for your workspace. So usually what happens is you'll need to have a new solid layer at the bottom just to kind of become like the real background. So yeah, I was saying that I'm going to do like this rotation. How far is she going to bob her head? And then this is actually, let's start from -6. So this is not a really cool thing. It's like you can, rather than, you can do different, like you can use your mouse to drag this to see how far you want, but I sometimes like to kind of just put like the amount, so it's really accurate. If I want this to be like -6 to the left, and then I want it, excuse me, sorry, and then to the right is another 6 points, so like I know it's consistent. Yeah,
So you're not going exactly as far to the left as it is to the right. Kind of, you've put the maths to work.
Yeah, it's a really mathematical based software, the more I think about it. So now she's bobbing her head, and then this is another really important thing is, so if you look at this keyframe, it's we only have 0.1 to 0.2, 0.2 to 0.3, and what you'll see in my scene is actually like she keeps doing that again and again. So this is another thing that I also shared, which I really like using, is the expression. So this is like the coding, and you can automate things, and a lot of different softwares also have this. Is you can right click, edit expression, and then you click, you type loop out. So what happens to that is it's gonna keep doing that literally indefinitely. So you don't have to keep copy and pasting all these different keyframes, because that's gonna be really tedious. And imagine like you just want to change, like you say you want to make it really long, like you want to make it, like you want to stretch it out. You can't do that if you have so many keyframes, because the moment you change one part of that, like you have to change everything. It's gonna be really messy. And I think one of the key things, no pun intended, is like to have as few keyframes as you can,
Right.
because that means like it's less factor that can mess up with the animation and the way it looks. So this loop out expression is really useful, and there's a few different looping expression. If you search in Google, like like you can study up like the way there's a ping pong, there is the one that is I forgot like the names, but there's so many of them, and it's really useful to know some of this looping expression. It's not just looping, but they have a few like making things work, like move randomly. Like imagine like a fly flying, and then it's just like moving randomly. Like they have that as well.
Yeah, so you don't have to animate it and then it loops, but it will generate a random sort of pattern. So there's all these sort of shortcuts that you can get that you can just very quickly search and just inject it in there and play around and see how it looks.
Yeah, so this is like one of the things that you'll use a lot, and I think most animators, when they find this, it is like a lifesaver. Because in the past, what I did is I literally do this, and then I'll move things around. Oops, that's scary. I move things around manually. I mean, it works, but like you know that it's not sustainable. So I think it's really being purposeful and also like planning ahead, because certain quick fixes may work, but they can add up, like they will like keep piling up, and when you want to go back and change something, it became like a really big burden. So one of the key things in animation is as well keeping the file as clean as possible, so when you have to revisit the file or you need to use the file, it's not a lot of things that you have to change, and you don't get scared. And you always have that, usually you always have that one project where you had such a short deadline, and it was so messy, and people are so scared if they have to make edits on those projects files, because they know that when they were doing it, they were just, let's just like do this, it looks okay, but then like it's really important to keep your file clean as well.
I think that's really good advice, and time is really important, right? Like, you know, if you know, keeping things simple is a really good design tactic for all of design, and including animation. So yeah, it's good advice.
Yeah, and like you'll think that it's a lot of, like, even like for the layering part, like when you name all the layers, it feels like you waste a lot of time, but trust me, like you're gonna waste more time if you don't do that. So that's also like another thing that you have to keep in mind when you feel lazy in doing some of this housekeeping, is whatever time you spend now is going to save you more time later. So that's something that I keep in mind for myself. Yeah.
There was just a question. There's a few people in chat talking about using Photoshop over Illustrator. Have you ever done that? Brought in Photoshop file into After Effects to animate it? My guess would be, I mean, because they're both working in vectors, so you're going to have scaling issues and things like that potentially. But have you ever done that?
I think I have. Like, I don't remember when, but yeah, I think you can do that. You can import like a background that you really liked from Photoshop. But yeah, like as you mentioned, like the thing really cool with After Effects here, like if I'm zooming in like 800% now, so that's why like it's a bit pixelated, but if you click right on, like say the head, you click right, you can right click, you can create shapes from vector layer. So what happens is like I'll just click it, and then so what happens is now I have the vector native to After Effects. So it actually, so the shape here is, so the shape here, like you can create shape in After Effects, and I know like some people traditionally do this rather than building the character in other software, they build it here. So you create all the shape, you create the face, but then like in here you can actually convert that into a native After Effects shapes, which is really useful. But like the catch is just that whatever changes you make in the AI file will not translate anymore to the After Effects, because you have converted that.
Right. But so once you've converted it, you can't do the trick that you were showing before, where you could change the original source file and like the hair and everything changed. Great. Yeah, that's good to know.
Yeah, but the really cool thing with that is like when you convert it to the shape, you can just adjust the scaling, and there's not going to be any pixelation.
Yep.
So I think another really good trick is like when you're preparing a file in AI is to actually make it bigger, like slightly bigger or like bigger than the screen size. Because when you scale it down, obviously like it won't lose any details, but when you need it to be bigger, it may potentially pixelate. So yeah, that's another thing that I also learned. And this kind of thing, like you learn as you go, like when you were trying out and you realize, oh, I should have done this next time. So it's really, don't be too stressed like about trying to keep everything in mind, but because like as you go, you'll learn that this is easier next time. But yeah, Photoshop you can do. I know people do that, but I think it's just more compatible with Vector personally. Again, I'm no expert in this. um, Another thing that is really important for especially characters is the curve and the graph. And this is something that takes a while for me to learn. I was working with this really cool animator and she's just teaching me about how graph works. So if I click on a graph icon here, and you'll see that this is what, so this is like trying to reflect what's happening on screen. And you can see like actually this, what is this? Yeah, this is the speed graph. So you can actually see that everything is constant. But we know that in real life, when someone head is moving or when any human body parts are moving, we are not moving in a constant manner. So it looks more robotic. And so what happens is like you can highlight that, click right, and then keyframe assistant, easy ease. So you can see that there is a certain kind of like part where it speeds up and it slows down, and you can adjust it like this. And so what happens is this is like quite cute. So because it looks like when you're like nodding your head when you're sleeping,
Right.
and like do that.
Kind of falling asleep on the train.
Yeah, I think it makes more sense than bobbing your head now. But yeah, like you can play with the graph. It's really cool. Obviously, this is not like perfect at this point, but like you know that when you change the way the speed works, you can have different effect. So it's like, yeah, when you're like nodding off in classes or lectures, like this is what it usually looks like. So yeah, but it's really important. Like I think by default you can just put it by easy ease. It's always much better than having it by the normal. You can always turn it back if you want to, like by clicking that, I think. Oops! Oh, that's not even. Yeah. Which one? Yep, that's the one. So that the one. So there's like a few different settings here when you highlight that. So this one is actually just, it's not even showing any transition. It's just showing from point A to point B without any in between. But I think like you can imagine that there's certain kind of aesthetic that can work with this. I can see it like a really cute stop motion or things like that where you don't want to see any in between movements.
Yeah.
Yeah. So play with the curve. It takes a bit of time, but the way things ease and ease out will make a whole lot difference to your work. Okay. How much time do we have left?
So we have 15. We have 15 minutes left.
That's crazy. Okay. All right.
I know, it goes so fast, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is. So for the bun, like let's do this. Like I want the bun to rotate in a way that's similar to the head. So what I can do is like you can click on the rotation effects. So you have all your keyframes selected. You can copy that, and then when you click on your bun, you can Command V or paste that. So when you press U, you can see the animation that is active on that one. And you can actually see, oops, I have to change the anchor point again. You can actually see that it's also moving a bit. But if I move this, stagger this, like it's gonna be really quite funny. Like you can see that there is that kind of
it's like a little bob, like because the hair's slightly following her.
Yep. So like just with that, it adds certain volume to that, rather than just everything move in the same speed, because we know again in real life things are not like that. So yeah, like you can apply that to the bow as well, so you have that kind of movement with the bow. So it's really cute, and I really like adding the small details even though it's small. But for me personally, like I enjoy looking at the way it moves. And yeah, okay, so that's a character. Like have a lot of fun with that, changing the way, like just even moving the keyframes by a bit, copying the same keyframe so you don't have to redo that again. So it will also copy the loop out expression, as you can see.
And there was a question, it's popped up twice, I'll just mention it, but if we won't have time for this because we're moving on from the face, but if you wanted to change the expression on the face, like her eyes opening or her mouth, you know, going from happy to sad, you could do that as well, and it would continue to move with the head.
Is that a question or?
It's a statement, I guess. Yeah, we'll move on. Okay. Just wanted to address it because it came up a couple of times, but yeah, you could do that. But we won't be doing that today because we're going to move on.
Yeah, because like when you have the eyes and all different parts and then you parent that to the head, like you can do whatever you want with the face. You can even create a composition inside that, and then it will keep following the head, but then you can do a mini animation inside. So it's kind of like Inception. This whole thing's like Inception, basically.
Yeah.
And you keep adding more scenes into the thing. Yeah. And there you go. Suddenly I'm just bringing this 3D space. So if I go to After Effects, Illustrator, like remember these scenes where I have the different hills, separate them. So this is what I do in After Effects to create the parallax is this all usually, like it's a lot of things going on here, but basically I turn on the 3D layer. So there's this icon that looks like a cube. So basically what it does, it brings the scene into a 3D space. So usually what happens is we just play in the 2D space, which is the X and Y axis. But when you turn on the 3D layer, you are enabling the Z axis, which is the depth. And this is what happens here. So initially everything was just in one plane, and then I spread them out. And we know that, so it's really easy in a sense that we know that when the sea is over there, the second and the third hill has some kind of distance between them. You separate them in that, you arrange them in that kind of logic. And how you do that is, I'll just hide this camera first. So you can press, when you look at this, so this is what usually happens, it's just one view. But then you can click to view, and then, so this one is a custom view, which means you can, when you press C, you can move around. Cool. So C is for, you can orbit around it. And you can see, okay, this makes sense. Like it looks really, and then this is camera 1. So for parallax, it's good, like when you set up like layer new camera, and then I use the 28 millimeters for the preset, and then just name it camera, click OK, and then you'll have the camera. So this windows over here will show whatever the camera is looking at. So even though it looks really ugly here, because like, what is this? All this wiggle. But then like what you need to pay attention is like what is being seen in the camera. Yeah, so if I turn that back on, so if I move that across the x-axis, you'll see that.
Cool.
There's that. So you want to animate this. You want to animate this x-axis.
And it's subtle, but it's not just moving like everything moving at the same rate. You can actually see that the foreground is moving at a different speed to the background and the middle.
Yep. So like even if you want to make it more obvious, like you can separate them even more as well, and you can really see the difference. And yeah, so that's what I did with the setup. So this is hill number 1, hill number 2, hill number 3, and then the ocean really at the back. And I was talking about the remote control part is so like when I create layer, new, null object, and so this is like, pretend this is like a remote control, and then you can parent the camera to the null. So I have this null here, and then like it's interesting if you look at the camera, I'm not animating the camera, but I'm actually animating the null object. But then since the camera is parented to the null object, it moves together. So the null object acts like a remote control for the camera rather than animating the camera itself. And it's really useful, especially if you have a few different things and you want to animate them in the same movement, the same speed, to use the null object. So, and it's called null object because it will not be seen in the scene. So the whole purpose of that is usually it's just to become a control, and people when they use like when they read characters, they use now object to help move things without having it to interrupt with the way it looks in the scene. Yeah, it's a lot of things to take in, I think, with the rest of the 10 minutes, I think, at this point.
Yeah, not a lot of time. But yeah, it's super interesting. Like something I
Yeah.
think that we can, everyone can play with a little bit.
This is one of my first projects in uni, I think, like the parallax effect. So we have these different scenes, and yeah, it's really useful. And if I go back to the train scene, so this is just the train without the character. Whatever animation that goes inside that, so I put the parallax background here, and I have like a wall to kind of like block out everything else. So see how it looks really ugly. So this is the thing with animation projects, like only you are able to see like all this messiness, but like what's really important again is what's on the scene and what's seen and what is not. And so I have this wall that's acting like a window, and then the parallax background is the one that we did just now. And for the sun and the cloud, because like usually when you're in a car and you're looking at the moon, you can't look at the sun because your eyes gonna hurt. But when you look at the moon, like, it's interesting how the moon doesn't look like it's moving. It's like I don't know if you guys ever done this. Like when I was little, like when I'm in a car, it feels like I want to chase the moon, but it's like I can never get to the moon.
Right.
Because the moon is so far away. So what happens is the same with this. I don't put the sun inside the other scene, but actually I do a really subtle precision animation. So it's actually moving, but in a really, really subtle way with the cloud as well. Yeah.
It's cool.
So you can get a sense of space by adjusting the different speed and the depth of the scenes. Like the sun barely moves and the cloud moves a bit. So it's just like that kind of observation again that you try to apply in the animation. Yeah. So that's actually kind of like the way I break it down.
It's great.
And it's the same as well. Like it's like the principle that I'm using. I'm sorry, Flynn. Like I know, like we say, it's gonna be a loop, but it's not.
We did talk about that. We did talk about that last week, didn't we?
Yeah, but I think I did say I didn't think I promised, so that's good. Yeah, like so the hand railing also has the same kind of principle. Rather than it just moving like in a straight line, I staggered the way it swings. So you can see there's like you can tell like this is heavier than this, and it's really easy. Like when you have like for this instance is the rail handle, you can just duplicate them by Command D and then just have them here. But be careful that it's gonna look quite funny because everything's gonna look really uniform. And like sometimes you think like I'm just gonna duplicate this and then I'm just gonna change this. But what happens is it's actually the same composition because it has the same name. So if you want to duplicate a composition, you don't do it. You don't do it here. You have to do it in the library. So you go here, you copy it. It will have composition 2, and then you bring it down.
Right. So otherwise you're making a copy of something that's being referenced. So it's coming from the library. So you're just making lots of the same one. But if you want to make those subtle kind of changes, or like maybe you animated a person but you wanted to have someone else sitting next to them or something, then you could copy the original, move it over, and then make your changes.
Yeah.
Cool.
So even like just moving it by a bit so it doesn't look like everything is moving on the same. So like even like those small things that I like, and at the end of all this, just adding a nice train background music. So that's just adding to the atmosphere. I guess this is what I like with my illustration, is just adding this really simple movement, and imagine this like kind of like a white noise kind of background image.
How would you add audio in?
Yeah, same thing. I don't have any file with me now, but you just import them the same way, Command I, and then just find your audio file and just put it on your scenes.
Yep.
Yeah, and just like a really quick thing, like don't illegally download or use music.
Yeah, you got to be very careful with that. Is there a particular place that you might get your music from, like any sort of royalty free like sound libraries or anything like that, you can use Adobe stock now within After Effects and Premiere if you wanted to do that, if you're working on a commercial piece or something. But of course, we all like the free stuff too. So got any resources that you go to?
Usually I just search royalty free
Yeah.
background music. Like that's literally what I put in the Google search. But
Yeah.
I find that there are places like, is it Bandcamp Band? I forget. But basically, like you can have all these
Bandcamp.
independent artists
Yeah.
who sell, Bandcamp, like
Yeah.
independent artists who sell their album for like really affordable price. And I think it's good to use those resources as well. They are not as expensive, but always pay attention what you are allowed to use them for, because I think some artists are okay. Again, you have to check. Every artist is different. Like some artists are okay if it's for personal work, but when it comes to commercial or it's for an app or it's for like for work, like you have to pay a certain license fee. And that's really important. I think a lot of, like with the whole internet thing, I think sometimes we think that if it's in the internet, you can just like use it. And I learned that as well, like as I go. Like I guess this is the kind of thing that we also learn, that to appreciate, like that whatever thing that is online is not, it does not pop out of nothingness.
Yeah.
So to just give credit, even if it's free, just to give credit to the artist so they get more exposure, is really good. Really good practice to do
that's true.
as well. Yeah.
For sure.
But yeah, like even like in agency, like usually there's a sound designer who specializes just in creating sound that works well with your animation, so everything works really coherently, and then you'll still have to add the sound file back to the scenes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Well, believe it or not, we're pretty much out of time. We've only got about a minute left. It's gone very fast.
Yeah, so yeah, guys, animation project takes time. Takes a lot of time.
For sure, but there's lots of things that we can learn in there, and I think also for people new to After Effects, don't be shy. It can be a bit intimidating sometimes for some of us that are like visual designers primarily or illustrators, but yeah, a couple of, pretty straightforward tips there that I think that people could apply to lots of different projects. So yeah, give it a go. Give yourself some homework to do over the holiday break, maybe.
Yeah, just start small. Start small from like this kind of really simple animation. Like you can rewatch this again if you want to, but like start from like character rigging and things like that. Separating files, preparing your files, and like just start from there, and then you can build like a bigger scene or something. Yeah.
Oh, it's been awesome. It's been so much fun hanging out with you, and thank you for sharing everything with us. I'm just going to bring us up. Yeah, thank you so much. Check out last week's session if you want to catch the Illustrator version of it. Hope you learned something today. Thank you everybody for hanging out in chat. This is our last stream for the year, so we'll see you in 2021. Okay. And thank you so much, Adrianne, for joining us for our last stream. We've had just such a great time with you.
Yeah, thanks so much for it as well. It's great to be here, and I hope that it wasn't confusing just now. Yeah.
It was great. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful holiday. Have a break, and we'll see you next year. See you later.